unlike some of the other comparison videos I've done, these two types actually have functions in common, so can understandably be confused for each other. They both exist on a particular axis, where their main way of approaching the world is the same, and they will also experience lots of the same difficulties in life. So you might be watching this video after taking the 16personalities.com test, in which case you may have got INTJ or INFJ as your type. As you will over time come to know, that test is quite inaccurate. So it's best to compare the cognitive functions of each type. The thing they have in common is they both have introverted intuition or NI as their top function and extroverted sensing or SE as their bottom function. This can be called the NI-SE axis. Both types are intuitive, and in particular it's the same kind of intuition they both use. Both types will struggle with the sensory, concrete world, and both types are introverts. However, INFJs are much more likely to come across as extroverts than INTJs are. This is because a type's first extroverted function is the one that is most likely to be apparent to other people. For INFJs, this would be their second slot extroverted feeling, or FE, which is by definition a people-focused function. For INTJs, however, this would be their second slot extroverted thinking, or TE, which doesn't have to be people-focused. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. Extroverted thinking is focused on efficiency and structure and is very systematic. It can be people-focused. For example, when working on improving a system that people will eventually benefit from using, or organizing people together in a strategic way. But you don't necessarily need social contact to do those things. You can kind of lurk in your own lair, working on either building a system from scratch or refining an existing one. And eventually, whoever it's intended for can benefit from it. So extroverted thinking, or TE, can be for the benefit of, but not necessarily need to include, people. So I have an INTJ friend who is very introverted, has set up his house in a fantastic way so he can work basically exclusively from there if he wanted to. And he's constantly creating things, products and systems. And he'll always tell me about how he's made something much more efficient, or easier to understand, or faster. Now, all of those things ultimately are for other people to benefit from. It's people-focused in that sense. He is building it because he wants others to use it. But while doing that, and while building these things, he doesn't need other people around, other than maybe online developers. So kind of a quick trick question is, could you ever be mistaken for an extrovert? If so, that could point to INFJ rather than INTJ. As always, these are generalizations. There are plenty of INTJs that are very social and love people, but even in those situations I've noticed their friends would still know that they are introverts, and they would know themselves that they're introverts. Whereas with INFJs, they also tend to know they're introverts, but their friends would be kind of surprised if they describe themselves that way. So let's look at the middle two functions of each of these types. INFJs have FE and TI, and INTJs have TE and FI. In INFJs, here's some ways that those two middle functions could manifest themselves. Analysing human motives and behaviour, knowing their own logical reasons for things, but choosing when and how to best deliver those opinions and reasons to others, if at all. Prioritises harmony over needing to argue logical points. They want to foster relationships and to connect with people, whilst always being able to step back and analyse them in kind of a detached way. They can be so focused on other people that it can sometimes be at the expense of, or to the exclusion of, self-reflection and introspecting on their own feelings and motives. This can even lead to a feeling of hollowness, where they've kind of exhausted themselves on others. They're often referred to as the counsellor, or something like that, which means that the dynamic that naturally happens between them and people is that they are listening. They're absorbing the person, they're analysing the person, they're helping the person. But there is a one-sidedness to that. Now, that's because that's the way they like it, but still, that extreme dynamic can sometimes have a cost as well. And this can make them excellent, as the nickname goes, confidants, mentors, advisors, using their NI to project a future plan or vision for someone that they've spent the time to thoroughly understand. Being able to not just somehow know the right path for a person, but to subtly push and maneuver them onto it. INTJs have extroverted thinking, TE, and introverted feeling, FI, as their middle two. And this is how that function axis could manifest. They prioritise objectivity and rationality over their own individual feelings. What works is more important than what they like. However, they're strongly influenced by their individuality and, in a sense, are obligated to act upon it. TE and FI together, in the middle two slots, manifest as trying to bring into existence, in the most structured and efficient and effective way, their own personal desires. INFJs are actually highly individualistic, to the point where I imagine many ISFPs mistype as INTJs, and vice versa. Introverted feeling plays a very big, but often unseen, role in their life, like INFJs and their TI. So even when an INTJ is creating something like a product, their focus is obviously for it to work in the best way. For it to tick certain boxes, it needs to objectively make sense and work. Extroverted thinking is kind of universal in that sense. It needs to work for everyone. I remember reading some story about Steve Jobs where, with the iPod, he wanted the person to pick up the iPod and get the song playing within 3 clicks. I might be misremembering the sensory details on that one, but someone can correct me in the comments on what the actual story is. Either way, theoretically, if that story is true, getting to a song in 3 clicks rather than 4 clicks is just better for everyone. That is the kind of extroverted thinking mindset. It just works better. Nonetheless, as with every type, those middle two functions are the complete opposite of each other. So right next to that function, you have FI, a very individualistic function. So the way this would manifest, even in a product that is supposed to be designed for everyone, the INTJ will still have their very individual aesthetic, for example, put into it. It needs to look this way. I'm not going to explain to you why, I just want it to look that way. It's my preference. You will notice that some people tend to design things with a similar kind of vibe to them, whereas some artists or musicians or business people will completely change up their design just because they want to. So INTJs are very aware of their own motivations and drives, and they want to do things that improve other people's lives, often in a very TE rational way of making things work better. They kind of equate the idea of, if this works better, people will feel better, which, as they'll find out, is not how irrational humans work, but nonetheless, that's their mindset most of the time. This means that the idea of connecting with people on a purely emotional realm for its own sake is very alien to INTJs. Like many thinking types, INTJs believe that if a person is feeling bad, it's because they have a problem, and when that problem is solved, they'll feel good. And for INTJs that have NI, which puts them in their head, in their imaginations, in their sort of vision projecting world, then TE, which is for people in many ways, but doesn't need people, then FI, very individual, and no FE in sight. That's going to make the ability to connect with many people difficult. Again, INTJs can be highly charismatic and social, but I think most of them would agree that it is not the most natural form of existing for them. It has challenges that can definitely be overcome, but also definitely exist. So there's this fascinating contrast between INFJs and INTJs. INFJs are exceptional at connecting with and motivating people, yet this can sometimes be at the expense of feeling hollow towards their own inner feelings. INTJs, on the other hand, deeply understand their own motives and feelings, yet have a disconnect or seemingly unbridgeable gap between themselves and other people around them. As always, we're talking in extremes here and in archetypes, ones that don't match perfectly onto human beings. By making this extreme dichotomy, it can help people to choose which side they lean on versus another, even though in reality we're all probably closer to the middle than either extreme. INFJs can self-reflect and INTJs can have friends. Honest. Probably the most common misconception is that people think I'm very emotional, so I can't be an INTJ, or I'm too logical to be an INFJ. Both of those are false. When you think about it, INFJs and INTJs are kind of balanced when it comes to their thinking and feeling functions. Their actual imbalance is between NI and SI. What causes the difference between them when it comes to thinking and feeling is that they have different types of thinking functions and different types of feeling functions, rather than it simply being the fact that one is a thinker and one is a feeler. When you look across lots of the different systems in typology, that third function is actually very influential on a type. For example, in socionics, it's called the activating or mobilizing function, I think. It's a function that a type likes to satisfy and feel like they're being good at. and you can often do well with a person if you trigger that within them. So for example, an INFJ would be wanting to satisfy their TI, and an INTJ satisfying their FI. So in socionics, there's kind of a respect or desire to be good at that function. Then this has been taken even further in the objective personality system, who advocate the existence of jumper types. These are types that actually prefer their first and third function. They call them saviors, where those types still have the same function order, but they value function number 1 and function number 3 more than the others. Then the other two become demon functions. So suddenly in their system, you can now have an INFJ who values NI and TI the most. Technically, they would be classed as an NT type, yet being an INFJ still. And similarly with an INTJ who prefers NI and FI, making them technically an NF type, yet still being an INTJ. So as you can see, simply using things like I'm logical or I'm emotional, I'm detached or I'm empathetic are probably not going to serve you that well. The distinction between thinkers and feelers and intuitives and sensors can kind of fall apart quite quickly. You want to look at how these specific functions work together, on axes and in pairs. Analysing anything in isolation is probably going to lead you down the wrong path. So I know what you're thinking. You're thinking two things. Number 1, I still don't know whether I'm INTJ or INFJ. And number 2, how do I give this person money? Well, regarding point 1, sorry. And regarding point 2, you can buy our typology themed mugs that we've designed. You'll see these underneath the video in a banner. And if for some reason they don't show up for you, we'll put a link in the description. People in the comments have been saying to us, if you change this colour or add this thing, then we'll buy it. We've made the changes and they bought them. So please have a look and just give us your honest feedback. It is extremely useful. We're also finally adding videos to our Patreon, so you can go on there and see some interviews that me and Luann have been doing. And finally, if you still don't know if you're INFJ or INTJ, we have loads of videos on both types on this channel. Go and check them out and see which one resonates with you more. Now, I won't ask you to subscribe because some of our videos have around 100,000 views, which means we must have 100,000 subscribers. I mean, who would watch a video and not subscribe? I mean, watching a video and not subscribing, that's just really bad.